Right, so good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Dare Dallas webinar. I'm obviously honoured, as always, to be joined this evening by my very good friends and colleagues, Jonathan Horwich and Ben Hanley. So good evening, gentlemen.
Hello, good evening.
Hi, everybody.
And I hope you all have had a pleasant weekend and all back to good valuation work this week.
Yeah, we're all jubileed out now, ready for anything.
Excellent. So this evening's conversation with Ben and Jonathan is basically boom or bust. What's happening with the art market at the moment? What's happened in the last couple of years? And basically a bit of a review to see what is going on and what's been happening. So Ben, I'm going to put the question to you first. What is the art market like in general post-COVID?
It's boom rather than bust, I have to say. I mean, when COVID hit, I thought that was the end of the art market. I think it was going to be going into recession, but oddly enough, the exact opposite happened. I mean, even during recession, even during the COVID pandemic itself, you found that people who had money kept their money. People who are on even relatively normal incomes were able to save money. So there was a lot of money flushing around, and people were bored. People started to look around. People were used to doing Zoom calls, so therefore the connectivity issues were improved. People were used to and more comfortable doing things online, so they started to browse. This is even at the lower to mid level of the market. So auctions started to do very well. The audience and the collector base increased. So just from that level, it just developed. The whole level of and size of the collector base nearly doubled, in fact, in some areas. At the higher level of the market and coming out of COVID, it's turned almost into a masterpiece market. I mean, things that are of spectacular provenance, quality, by the top artists, blue chip artists. They're making extraordinary prices at the moment. Across the board, from contemporary to old masters. Dave's not here to talk about that, but old masters, blue chip impressionists. I mean, there's been some fantastic sales. So there's a huge energy in the market. There's a huge amount of money in the market, and quite frankly, some of the prices that have been achieved, I haven't seen the like of it. So
and Jonathan, I'm presuming you're in agreement with that.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Ben, spot on. It's a miracle in some ways, but I think what may have happened is that COVID somehow forced a situation which enabled other things. There's always, in all businesses, whether they're auction or galleries or any type of business, there's always lots of good ideas sitting on shelves here and there, and sometimes they get put into practice, sometimes they get forgotten. And I think what happened is all the good ideas, like buying unseen, in other words, from a virtual auction with no audience, just an auctioneer in a room, who would have thought that would work? Well, guess what? As Ben pointed out, it did and worked very well. And all of us chipped in. We had more time than usual, so people would spend more time online so they could buy online. It somehow became, auctions and galleries particularly reached out, even the museums. Otherwise, you could take a virtual tour of the Frick in New York instead of getting on a plane to go to New York to see it in very high definition, and walk yourself around. So I think a lot of new things which might not have come to the fore did, and I think the market has benefited.
Ben, do you think that the art has become more accessible to the normal person? And this is why those medium value kind of pieces that people are able to buy from auctions or from galleries, but they are, more accessible. People can actually see them online and buy them, as Jonathan was saying, without actually going to view them in situ.
You mean the accessibility in terms of just the viewing the works, that sort of thing? I suppose so, yes. But I think it's as we just said, I think a lot of people we're habit based, and we had a year where our habits changed. People got into the habit of surfing the net, going online, looking at their galleries, and the galleries, the auction houses, they up their game in how you view things. So everything was made easier, but it's just that, to be honest with you, it's down to people having the time, people changing their habits. Once people get the bug of collecting, they continue to do so. So I think it's a combination of increased digital friendliness and functionality tied up with people having had a year and a half of more time on their hands. Just down to that.
It's very simple things that Ben, I think, is spot on. It's things like, how would you, if you were buying virtually without going to see it, how would you tell how big the picture is? In other words, the measurements are there, but it's very hard to get scale on a computer, so that the auction houses and the dealers added in an extra screen which shows a member of staff standing in a set position and the picture on the wall, so you can see whether it's a tiny picture or a huge picture, so you get some idea of what you're getting. Very clever, just very simple.
We're all very, very surprised and impressed on how the major auction houses coped with COVID, to be perfectly honest, and the way they actually managed to get everything through and to still keep going.
I mean, 100%. But I mean, to be honest with you, they had to. I mean, they had no choice. It's amazing, sink or swim. Before COVID, they had sales sort of in development, so they had kit coming in. And I think once the first couple of sales didn't bomb, then there was a momentum, and then they upped their game in terms of high resolution, as Jonathan just mentioned, all the tools and tricks that they brought out, and it just sort of developed from there. And then there was a lot of money out there, and people are bored, people have money, and if a sale does well, it feeds the market. The market is based on confidence, and the fact that the first couple of sales during COVID didn't bomb. I mean, the initial ones were a little bit conservative, but they didn't bomb, and that gave great confidence.
Jonathan, would you say then that the auction market now is the place to go? People don't go to dealers as much now, and they are going to auction houses and almost cutting out the middleman and saying, okay, I am going to buy from auctions now. Do auctions give the confidence that people need to purchase?
Yes, I think so. I think what's changed is, as we've said, the auction houses have made everything they do more accessible. That they've almost got rid of what probably to some extent was a mild irritation at actually having people in the sale room. Mostly now they're going virtual. So it's become easier. I don't know that they're doing anything. The cataloguing is more or less the same. It is just easier, and people are just used to the spell of not buying anything without seeing it is broken. I think that where the dealers have found it difficult is that a lot of the events they would meet new clients at have been cancelled. So some of the larger fairs, Maastricht and Art Basel, they just didn't take place. So what do? You reach out from your virtual gallery and you take people on a virtual tour, but there isn't the same rhythm of events that you get with auctions. There isn't something new every week. So they probably, and I noticed some of the galleries have combined forces. So let's say we three each had a gallery. Well, now if we're in New York, we probably combined the same space with all three of us working from the same space to make the best of our contacts and perhaps save some money and make some money.
I also think the auction houses, I think if we go back, they're big leviathans, they're big entities, they're big brands. When the COVID thing hit, they were better placed just to begin with in terms of the technological advances. Yeah. They had everything in place, albeit they upped their ante. So they hit the ground running. They were able to make great inroads there, and people buy into in some respects, the market has gone for brands. And by that, I mean, a lot of collectors aren't particularly interested now in the erudition behind a painting. Sometimes they're interested in buying what it is. They're interested in buying a Picasso, they're interested in buying a Lowry, whatever. They buy it for it being that artist. So the auction house in many ways, they work to that business model, whereas dealers in some respects sometimes are more erudite. They work with their clients and they build knowledge base. Auction houses, it's a marketplace, and it's as simple as that.
And we are very, very thankful to be joined by Mr. David Dallas as well now. Good evening, David.
Good evening, Alastair. Am I whistling?
Unfortunately, yes, David. Let's see how we get on, but we'll
say as little as possible.
Jonathan, do you think that the way in which these items are now being purchased, the methods in which they're being purchased, and the artists that are being purchased, do they change the way in which people are buying, and do they change the buyers? So the personality of a buyer now isn't what it used to be 20, 30 years ago, is it?
No, I think it's changed. It's got younger inevitably, as the ways in which it's possible to buy has encouraged, many more 20, 30 and 40 somethings to take part in auctions that perhaps didn't before. And there are new artists that they follow. So that in the same way that we've perhaps used social media more, I think what's happened is that two things have happened, that people who are successful at auction talk now not of buying, but winning something, which follows the same sort of eBay principle. So it's something, I won that in an auction at Christie's. And also they are following artists on Instagram and then watching them pop up here and there at auction and following that through by making a purchase. And that, with an artist who might have a very, very significant following, there is great merit in owning something by that particular artist. So it's just an extension, not just of social media, but of the brand. The same thing you see in sneakers and handbags. It's the artist becomes a brand as much as anything else. I think you mentioned branding, didn't you, Ben? I think Ben's, it's an interesting point. So the market will develop along those lines. I could see where names get bigger, and they probably will ebb and flow. So there probably some will be not so popular, and some will rise. It's you've got to embrace the social media, I think, to see what's new.
So what we were saying here, Ben, the market for 20th century living artists has never been better, has it? In
some respects, oddly enough, the contemporary sales, the recent ones that just went through, I was surprised by the not even mid-career, but early career artists, they're in their 30s, that normally it takes a while for their work to come onto the auction market. It just is as an indication of how important they are, or how their career moves on. They're being exposed to auction much earlier. And some of these artists who have very little track record go in at 100,000, 150,000, which is very significant money, but they've achieved very strong prices. Like Flora Yuknovich, I mean, she's made £2.2 million. And she's a 32-year-old artist. I love the work, but I have no idea where £2.2 million world record comes from an artist at 32. So
again,
I think that there's
very low estimates.
150 to 200,000 for that particular one. So there's very strong prices. And I think it goes back to what Jonathan was saying, that people are avidly watching. They're watching how the market plays behind the scenes, and then that translates into the auction rooms.
So I think Jonathan just touched on this briefly. Is it influencers? Is it the media? Is it social media? Are these, I think as Jonathan said, these people are being followed by people, and then is that pushing the price up, or is it just gathering the interest?
I don't think.
Yeah, sorry.
Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I think what's happened is that it's given people very often, when people come collecting pictures, nobody really needs a picture. You might need a table and a set of chairs or something like that. So pictures often sit at the luxury end of luxury. And certainly in the early stages of collecting, people feel more comfortable buying something that's familiar to people that they know, whether it be friends or family. So the fact that these are artists that are already known on social media, and then they're on your wall, is gratifying in all senses. So your friends come and they say, "Oh yes, you bought a Flora Yuknovich. I've seen her work." Yes. So you're home and dry. You've not been foolish. In fact, you've been far from it. You've been very sensible and bought something they've all heard about. It's very often the case that people would buy a more traditional artist like L.S. Lowry as a first purchase because everybody knows Lowry. And after that, you might buy more Lowrys or different things. It just breaks the spell a bit. But I think social media has driven it much wider. So you can know a lot more artists that way.
And social media, not so much a specific influence, but social media in general is geared and very successful at sort of lifestyle promotion. And art has become that. I mean, to me, music, art, whatever the scenes, they all have converged, particularly in the contemporary arena. So social media has pushed all that. Whether it's gotten a specific agenda, I can't say, or a specific influencer, but the social media in general, it's art is now lifestyle, and it's one element of it.
But is it a good thing, Ben, that we're now seeing people getting into art at whatever level it is at, and whether it even be at the sub £1,000 mark? And we've seen clients like that who are just buying art because they're loving it, and they're actually there is more stuff out there for them to buy in that kind of price range.
Of course, I mean, there's nothing. I mean, a stronger market and a wider base of collectors is always very. It's what everybody wants. We don't want. I mean, traditionally, the art collecting bracket has been a very narrow, small bracket. I mean, with the whole of from the 1950s onwards, that has been a gradual expansion, and it's become more democratic and just larger. I mean, in the last 10, 15 years, I mean, it's just exploded in terms of the democracy of it. And I mean that in terms of just the numbers, it's just increased hugely. So there's nothing but good comes from that, so long as it's a stable base.
And places such as, I don't know, Jealous or Henny Editions or Circa Art and things like that, gateway galleries, if you like, to actually buying bigger pieces when they want to spend more on art.
They're very clever. I mean, the Jealous Gallery in itself, I mean, it's an urban gallery. It's it made its name with Pure Evil and people like that. But its sort of market is under £500. But it's pushed through some very significant artists. Henny is clever in another way, in that it produces affordable, high editioned prints with significant artists, with Gerhard Richter, with Hearst, etc. So again, it's a similar sort of thing, but it's tied itself to bigger artists, but a wider edition. So therefore, they're more demographic or democratic in terms of the financials. So both those sort of business models are very successful in attracting new breed of collector.
And whilst we're talking about new breeds and new artists and the way in which things have changed, David, we'll come to you briefly, as I know we've got a few technical issues. But in terms of the way the old masters market has performed over the last couple of years, I'm presuming that the big names are still making lots of money, but there must be some bargains to be had out there as well at the moment.
I think there are. The biggest problem with old masters is supply, because it's dwindling. The paintings, if we said, for instance, you wanted to be a collector of Italian Renaissance art, which is one of the pinnacles of civilization, you could buy one masterpiece every decade. When they do come, they make huge amounts of money, like the Botticelli Boy that we looked at last year made $92 million, and then the Man of Sorrows made $45 million. But 100 years ago, you could collect Italian Renaissance paintings, so they were in big supply. But so many of the great collectors gave their collections to museums, and once they go into a museum, they don't come out again. So supply is our big problem. Having said which, in Holland, Belgium and Holland, in the Golden Age, the 17th century, people reckon that maybe somewhere between 1 million and 1.5 million paintings were produced. So supply is good there. I know 2 great collections in Massachusetts of Dutch and Flemish paintings, both of which are going to be left at the local museum, the MFA in Boston. So they'll be out of contention. But you're right, that there are bargains to be had in, say, Dutch 17th century things, and even English 18th century, because they're slightly old-fashioned. If you wanted to decorate a beautiful Georgian house in traditional English, in inverted commas, country house taste, you can do it now in real terms much more cheaply than you could have done 50 years ago. Whether they turn out to be bargains in that they can be sold well in a generation or two's time, I wouldn't like to say, but they're certainly much cheaper to collect. And you could decorate a house very attractively on a limited budget now compared to 50 years ago, just because taste has changed.
David, in the past few years, we've seen obviously a big change in the way that old masters especially are attributed, and attributions change and people change their minds. And there have been various television programs and things like that on where things, potentially people have got it wrong over the years and people have come back to see things. Do you think that's having a big kind of impact on the market? And do you think that people are going out and thinking, oh gosh, this might be by them and I'm just trying to find something?
I think it certainly would have an adverse effect on people who are new to the market. Who do you believe? If you're starting out a collection, you have to rely on the experts. And if the experts disagree, who do you trust? I think once you've been buying, collecting paintings for a decade or two, and you've started to back your own judgment, then it's probably a bit less of an issue. But to begin with, I think it's a minefield. And with many artists, certainly early 20th century artists, there are no accepted experts. It's very dangerous. I feel sorry for people setting out wanting to put collections together with no one to hold their hands.
Well, from the old masters market to possibly one of the most contentious issues or fantastically exciting things that have come along in recent years, and our own expert on the matter, which is Jonathan, the NFTs, Jonathan, yes, which seem to be still soaring. And when they came out, we were all convinced this would be an overnight thing. And this week alone, I've been invited to an NFT gallery opening, which sounds rather bizarre. How they're going to display NFTs, I don't know. But the market still seems very strong and very exciting to a lot of people, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, when you go to your exhibition, I think you'll find that the NFTs will be displayed on screens around the room. So the art will be on a flat screen. So each one will be a separate flat screen, so you can see what you're getting. The NFTs generally, as time has gone on, have added more movement in. So it may be a bit more interesting than perhaps at the very beginning. They popped up in 2014, and I think COVID brought them pretty much to the fore. They seem to be suddenly like greyhounds out of the trap from nowhere, that they seem to be established now. So the main auction houses all offer NFTs, and there are various portals that offer them now. So I think the question is, are they here to stay? I think so. There are some security issues. You have to be very careful about keeping, well, your cryptocurrency, I guess, but also your NFTs safe in your wallet, or wherever. It's a virtual wallet, bear in mind, not an actual one. So there are some security issues which would be a worry in a way if you're not. But it has. You asked me right at the beginning about new buyers, and indeed the 20-something, the 30-something is prime, well primed up for NFTs, and it's a much more familiar environment than it would be to me, for example, going in. That you're looking at what at first sight looks like cartoon images in many cases. And they don't really have much of an appeal to my generation, but they do to younger generations. And it's small nuances, differences between the images make them much more desirable. So it's a little bit like collecting bubblegum cards, or not quite cigarette cards. They're quite sort of really old fashioned, but the footballers cards. It's that sort of thing where you really, really, really want 443. And 443 is a especially rare one, and you've got to have it, and that will make more than 278. They're sort of like a limited edition.
Yeah, that's a very interesting analogy of what it is. So do we think it's more of a collectible than it is artwork then? Or does it just have to be in the form of art?
Yeah, I think it crosses the two. It's a form of art. It is. They are from, they have origins, but they're generally made on screen. So it's not quite iPad art, but it's made using computer technology. And the other issue is we say are NFTs here to stay? They're self-financing, which is something that regular art isn't generally, although it would benefit artists when it's resold. With NFTs, the owner of the copyright of the NFT, the maker, the artist, will receive a 10% premium or commission every time an NFT is sold. So if you've made 300 or 400 NFTs and they're constantly changing hands, then you're going to get 10% every time they change hands, forever and ever. Amen.
So effectively, we've got completely the opposite of the situation with the old masters market where there isn't enough stock. Now, with the NFT market, do you think that we're going to get to a position whereby there are so many people making hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of NFTs? And I think there's been a few situations recently where certain NFTs that have made quite a significant amount of money have gone on a later market to not make anywhere near as much.
Yeah, that's true. They've been offered, you know, someone has paid $5 million for an NFT. It comes up again and it either doesn't sell at all or it makes a pitiful sum. So some of the same rules apply. You put a reserve price on. But yes, some things have already in a relatively short time become undesirable, if that's the right word. What was hot. So you've got to watch what's hot, what's not, really. So it may well be, looking at the market, it tends to be the same things are still popular. And so if you follow the art market where it's still Andy Warhol and Basquiat and known names, that might be the case with NFTs. There might be a huge amount out there, but the value lies in a very small percentage of it.
Jonathan, how big a factor do you think the tradability and with the eye to a profit, how appealing is that, and how much of a factor is that in NFTs? Do you think people are buying? Is it the appeal of the individual art, or is it trying to buy into a tradable entity and have the upside?
I think it's option two. I think that it's having a tradable entity is where it is. And actually, I went to the art business conference, and they had an artist who previously had made art in the traditional way, paintings, prints, editions, and so on. And he is blessing the day he became involved in NFTs. I mean, he was so happy. And it's not the case that you think that artists always lead a happy life. They're not always happy because people don't appreciate them. They don't always buy their art. This guy was as happy as it's possible to be as an artist. He had made NFTs and made quite a name for himself. He comes from Sheffield. He's a really nice guy. And he's made enough money to sit back and think, what am I going to do next? In probably 18 months through NFTs. And they talk on a website, which I have mentioned before, but now rather inconveniently forgotten. It's not quite Disturb. It's something really quite significant.
Yes, I do remember the one yes.
Yeah.
I can't think of it either. Yes, yeah.
Anyway, it's very shouty. And that's the only thing that he finds difficult, is he has to spend 45 minutes talking to his collectors about his art on this particular exchange. It's like Telegraph. It's a little bit like sort of an out there Facebook, but much more aggressive. And he often finds he's talking to people who know more about his art than he does. They're so into it.
No, it's a fascinating subject, and I think one that's going to entertain us for the next few years at least before it kind of actually goes away. David, I'm going to come back to you because I think we're going to talk about, over the last couple of years, some of the big hitters that have actually come out and made quite a significant amount of money. So David, in your arena, in the old masters arena, there's been a few big hitters, haven't there, in the past couple of years?
There sure have. I mean, of course, the standout painting is Salvator Mundi by Leonardo, which leapfrogged everything that has ever been sold before, £450 million. It's head and shoulders more expensive than, and it's a pretty tiny picture. It's a life-size head and shoulders, as a matter of fact. It's so much more expensive than anything else. And of course, Leonardo is an absolutely magic name, isn't it? There's contention, as you were saying earlier, about the attribution. Some people don't go for it. I think it's finally come on public display in the Louvre, Abu Dhabi. I'm not sure about that. But it disappeared for quite a long time. For about 2 years after the sale, it vanished. But that, I mean, old masters have been lagging behind the contemporary world. Constable has never made as much as Gerhard Richter. So if you start making comparative prices, you flummox yourself quite quickly trying to work out what's going on. But suddenly then Leonardo comes back and on behalf of the old masters, triumphs at auction.
Pulls one back for the team.
Yeah.
Do you think, though, that the impact that the Leonardo had had a knock-on effect on all the other kind of his contemporaries and anything else?
I think it's a bit of a one-off. He's such a rare art. There are plenty of Leonardo drawings in existence, but they don't come on the market very often. I think the last one was a tiny, weeny head of a bear that made $8 million in New York. But I don't, because he's so special, I don't think it has any updraft effect on the rest of the market. I think it's a complete and utter one-off.
Dave, do you think the sort of cross-pollination that they did in terms of marketing, i.e. showing it internationally with contemporary and different other master works, do you think that's the way forward with old master sort of like star lots being shown so that it broadens the audience?
I think because of who Leonardo is, I think it was very intelligent to say it's contemporary because he's such a special painter. He's never going to be out of fashion.
Yeah.
He's just too great for that. And much as I was saying, old masters are in quite short supply, there's no harm whatsoever introducing them into contemporary collections. I mean, as the National Gallery's slogan says, before there was modern art, there was art. And
yeah.
You can't take it in isolation. It's all part of a continuum. And great old masters have their place amongst contemporary things. And I think they benefit from the juxtaposition. I think Christie did a great job putting it in the contemporary set, which is much the most active part of the market.
Thank you, Dave, for that viewpoint. Jonathan, I'll come to you next. Where in your arena do you think things have been spectacular over the last couple of years?
Yeah, good question. I think what's happened is that the categories have very sort of just very quietly blended together. So even just before lockdown, particularly, everything was in its place, and everything has been mixed up again. So what you might call modern art, which would be, for example, someone like Picasso is seen as modern, yet he is now intertwined with contemporary. The barriers have come down. That which separated Monet and from Basquiat, it is now to some extent melted away. Christie's, for example, have combined anything and everything that's 20th and 21st century together into one group of people, not working in isolation as they were doing before, but working together on building sales, which makes perfect sense. But it probably wouldn't have happened if it had not been for COVID, as Ben was alluding to before. When you really got to look hard at what you're doing and doing it differently, then that's sort of what's happened. It's a new mix, and it's very appealing that you're not trolling around 6 or 8 different sales. You can see as much as you want, probably in 2 or 3. And in New York, I think there was 2 weeks of sales, Ben, more or less, back to back contemporary.
Back to back. And you just alluding to what you're saying, they have the big auction houses have master weeks where they combine true masterpieces across all generations, so that on the understanding or the assumption that collectors at a certain level have a sophisticated eye, and also to tempt and to open up the audience to traditional audience and just tempt.
Do you think it's to move people outside of their comfort zone?
100%. It's about building new markets.
Specific period, and they're trying to say to you, look, in this realm, these things are on offer as well.
100%. And I think I'm going back to Dave's area. I mean, juxtapositioning old masters and then more contemporary with contemporary modern works. It highlights how beautiful they are and how well they sit. The quality goes with quality, but also the highlights the relative value of them. So that it again increases the appeal. It educates a client base which perhaps would never have looked. They wouldn't have gone to a dedicated old master sale, maybe. Or the same is also with high-end furniture, 18th century furniture. That there's a crossover in all these areas. I think that's a trend moving forward. That, and then sort of single owner sales, which the auction houses can market hugely, and they always achieve enormous prices. I mean, the Meiklejon collection in New York, case in point, nearly $1 billion. I mean, it's an insane number. Amazing works of art, but they were able to market it in multiple different sales, and you know, there's not the added benefit and cachet of a provenance is you just can't you can't put a number to it. It just adds so much more to the bottom line.
Just while we're talking about New York seems to be the place at the moment, doesn't it?
It always is. It has been. I mean, it's been the centre of the art market since the probably since the Rockefellers and before that, since the barons in the 19th century. I mean, it's where consistently the largest tranches of money are. I mean, people talk about Asia, people talk about the Middle East, and there's huge amounts of money, but they're also problematic. Asia getting money out is difficult. The cultural barriers are very big. Yes, there's enormous amounts of money, but it's a very new market. America is a very sophisticated, old, layers upon layers of very sophisticated clients and collectors, huge amounts of money, and they know what they're doing, and it's a very easy sort of transactional system.
Speaking of huge amounts of money, Ben, the Warhol, a good buy?
At the right price. Are we talking about the Marilyn? 195 million. I mean, good buy if you've got 195 million. Yes, it's an icon of the 20th century. So to a degree, the number doesn't matter. You're buying a piece of art history. I mean, if you want Warhol, it's probably the most iconic work you can get. I mean, you maybe an Elvis, but Marilyn says it all. So if you going back to brands and artists as brands, if you want to buy the top brand within that specific brand, you got it. I mean, you couldn't do better, and that'll hold its value.
And what's the knock-on effect going to be on all the other Warhols that are out there? I say all the others, there are obviously a few, and I presume the Basquiats that have sold as well have had such a huge impact on everything else beneath it.
And look, I mean, when the high prices are achieved, clearly the focus on the particular artist increases. However, it's all about quality. I mean, and with Warhol in particular, it's all about subject. Some subjects have huge appeal and make big money, others don't. And it's the same with this. Just because something makes 195 million doesn't mean there's the entire market is going to move up. However, it does sort of reaffirm that he's still blue chip artist, and therefore so that steadies clients. But it doesn't mean that every work by him is going to have a knock-on effect.
Right then, Jonathan. Brexit, COVID, Ukraine, all of these rather unfortunate things that have happened in the last couple of years. What impact are they having at the moment?
It's interesting. I was just before this, I was musing on what effect various things have had over time. I think little or no effect. COVID brought new ideas. Ukraine, desperately sad and difficult as it is not affecting the market. The only thing I could see there is a direct effect, is that the annual or the biannual Russian sales that would take place have disappeared. So this time of year, you'd be looking at a series of sales in London of Russian works of art, including Fabergé, nowhere to be seen. They've all been called off. So there is effectively a moratorium on selling Russian art. So that's the effect in a way. It's not what you'd expect, but it's sort of sanctioned. Does that
mean theoretically then, Jonathan, that if you were to bring certain Russian artists to auction at the moment, the buyers for them would just be non-existent?
I don't know what would happen. I mean, the showcase sales, the Russian sale weeks are just not happening this year. I guess they will reappear, and they were, events at which Russian buyers would come to view, come to the parties, come to be seen and to buy art, and they were doing well prior to the invasion of Ukraine. So I guess that will come back, but whether it'll be in exactly the same form as before. And they're quite big features for the main London sale rooms, not so much in the US. They don't exist in the US because, well, inevitably it's not as easy. They just don't happen. It's a focus on London. So property will come from America and Russia and Middle Europe for sale in London. So that's, I think, the most direct effect.
And I'm going to put a question to you. We're coming towards the end of this webinar today, but I'm going to put a question to you. Where do you see the art market going in the next couple of years? We've had a bit of a boom. Things have been very, very good. We are potentially, going into what could be financially a rather tricky period. Do you think the art market is going to perform as well as it has done in the last couple of years? Ben, I'm going to put that to you first.
There's no reason, I mean, as Jonathan said, where we are now is a miracle in terms of what we've gone through. So there's no real reason to assume that that's going to change. I mean, all the indications are that the art market, people are currently, everyone's worried about money. People with money put their money into solid items into solid tangible assets. I think that always has been a characteristic of times of woe. So I think the art market will probably benefit from that. The fact that the art market has turned into a masterpiece art market, good things will always do well. There's no indication that we're going into a recession at all, no.
David, your view on that?
I agree with Ben. I think that the art market will flourish. It's gone through some tough times and proved itself to be very vigorous. I think COVID had a beneficial effect. I was talking to Aubrey Dawson of Dawson's Auctioneers. And before COVID, he was selling to people from 85 different countries. And once we all got locked down and people haven't got much to do apart from look on their computer screens, he's now selling to 130 different nationalities. But I think the art market will flourish. And as Ben was saying, in a time of inflation, when people's faith in money is dented, their faith in things is in inverse proportion. So I would see gold going up and paintings going up, diamonds going up.
Jonathan, your view?
Yeah, I think Dave's right, and Ben as well. There's the art market is linked to property to some extent, to the housing market. It's also linked to interest rates. With historically low interest rates, there hasn't been that many places you can put your money where you can both enjoy them and get a return, and that's benefited art. I have a distinct memory of the period 1990 to 1994 or 5, when interest rates were very high. So if you had money, you would enjoy putting it in the bank because you got nearly 15%, 15% back. So if you were borrowing, then it was very nearly 20%. So at that time, I remember you couldn't get people to sell, and it was very hard to get people to buy. So supply, I noticed that in the modern sales in New York, that they did well, but the buyer expectation was meeting the seller expectation. Just to translate that, everything was making around about its estimate. Now that says to me that probably that's topped out a bit. It's got to its optimum level for the time being. And so it may be that supply could affect the modern market. There might be less around because people's expectations may be too high. Expectation is up here for the seller and the buyer's expectation is below that. Then that takes a while to adjust. But that's just only part of a market and just a market adjustment.
So I hate to say it with the Warhol, but that was pretty much what they'd anticipated, wasn't it?
Pretty much.
Yes. Yeah, you're sort of reading between the lines. Some of what you see is smoke and mirrors, in that for major things, people will want a financial guarantee, a promise that it will sell for a precise sum. And so if there is only one bidder and that person is the guarantor, well, then that it's sold. It may not represent the entire market. It might just be a one-off. Sorry, Ben, I interrupted.
No, not precisely. I was just going to say that in terms of it being the right price, another work from the same series that had, I think last year, it sold privately for $200 million. So it was benchmarked plus or minus. So it wasn't expected to fly much past that, nor bomb either. I mean, it made its money.
Fantastic. Gentlemen, it's always a pleasure to chat with all of you. And I'm going to ask you one last question. And I'm sure that the answers will be varied as they are different. So your grandchildren, who do they wish that you'd invested in? 100 years' time, who's going to be fantastically valuable?
Oh, God.
I think for me, it's Basquiat still. It's like a solid blue chip stock.
Benjamin?
Oh dear God! I'm going to be young and urban. I'm going to say Banksy bought early on. His uniques are still doing fantastic business. So that's where I'll go.
And David.
Yeah, I was going to say Banksy too, but I can't.
You can. You just did.
My own area. Gosh, what would I think? It's very difficult.
Well, it might be Leonardo, Dave, but I guess there's not going to be that many for the children to pick from.
Yes.
There aren't too many. I think I'd probably go for Great Dutch Landscape, maybe by Hobbimer, Albert Kuyt from this late period, or Jacob Risedale. I think they'll always be understood and appreciated. And as you were saying, they're not outrageously expensive.
Right. Now, gentlemen, I'm going to put some questions to the floor now. So are there any questions from our attendees this evening? If so, please either raise your hand or pop something up on the screen if you would. We'll give everyone a couple of minutes to come up with something from there.
Alastair, the website name for the NFTs I was trying to remember was Discord.
Discord, that's it, Discord.
Yes,
yeah.
Name.
You join Discord and disagree and be discordant with others who collect NFTs. It's quite a thing and quite exhausting.
Right, I'm just going to allow Heidi in. Hi, Heidi. Heidi, can you hear us? Oh, in 2 seconds. Heidi, I think you're muted.
Yeah, can you hear me?
We can hear you now.
Okay, great, thank you. You mentioned the fatal word Brexit, but didn't go on longer about it. Can you say how Brexit affected really the art market in London?
I think the 5% import duty that has come into effect, I think that's the most obvious effect, bearing in mind previously there was within Europe, there was free movement of paintings. Now to import, it becomes less attractive for people to import paintings, buy paintings, etc., because of that 5% import duty. I mean, it's a bit of a nightmare. A lot of smaller level dealers who bought extensively in Europe and then traded in the UK, they're finding their margins massively cut. Also, the logistics, shipping, everything's more expensive, more difficult. Clearly, again, bigger ticket items, those will weather the storm better, but I think the mid-level market is the logistics of it and the import and the taxing. That's been a massive and will have continued to be a massive impact. And you see Paris is taking up the slack, and the sales in the auction houses in Paris are being ramped up to take advantage of the situation.
Definitely had a negative impact on London's position.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And there's still a great affection for London, and alluding to what Jonathan was saying with the Russian sales. The reason the Russians came over was partly they've always had an affinity to London. Their schools, their children come over and they educated over here, so there's a sort of a cultural affinity. But they like the London scene, so people still like to. There's an affection to doing business in London, and that will continue. However, we're making it difficult for the art market just by leaving Europe. I mean, it's been a bit of a disaster.
That's great. Thank you ever so much, Heidi, for your question.
Thank you.
And we've had another question that's actually come across on the chat box here. If I was going to invest, where would I start? Jonathan, I'm going to put that to you.
Thank you very much. And I assume the question is invested in art.
I would assume so. Yes.
I think I would go for what used to be called prints and now is called editions. I think you've got there a very easy way of dipping your toe into the water. Editions generally are limited in number, and you could have a budget of £5,000 or £50,000 or £100,000. I remember Ben telling me about the Banksy phenomenon, which happened over lockdown, where, because generally speaking people had more time, they were looking at Banksy, and almost on a week by week, month by month basis, the price of a Balloon Girl print or those we all recognize was just going through the roof. They've settled back a bit now, but they've settled back to probably twice where they were before lockdown.
Yeah.
So I would say editions. And the thing is, if you miss one, there'll be another one. In other words, these are not unique pieces, but I've noticed that market in the last 5 to 8 years has just skyrocketed, and it can also include other items which are not flat art. So they could be small sculptures which are produced in editions as well. The world of sculpture is fun. So you could buy a book which has all of the editions in. You could look at the book, read the book, and then think, "Well, I'd like to own one of these prints," and then buy the print. And you've got the book and the print, and then you could buy more prints or fewer prints. It doesn't really matter. But they're all by names you know. So they're by Picasso, they're by Banksy, they're by Stick, they're by all sorts of people that you know of. It's just because they're editions, they are inevitably cheaper. But I think it's a very good way. And so you're dealing in all the names that are familiar, but it's not quite such big money. And you've got the reassurance of tracking the market through things like ArtNet and ArtPrice to see whether what you're paying is in line with the current market. That's what I'd go for. And it's fun too, and not hugely expensive to begin with, and a fairly safe place for your money.
Fantastic. Well, thank you ever so much for joining us this week, Jonathan, Ben, and David. Please do visit our website, www.dallasvaluations.co.uk, to check out all of our articles and everything that we do on this. And if you do have clients that are interested in specific areas of the art world, we're more than happy to talk to you or to them about their collections. This week, we've had some fantastic articles to do with the Queen, obviously, due to Jubilee, and Jonathan's fantastic article on Helen Bradley as well. So Ben, David, Jonathan, thank you ever so much for joining me this week. It's been a pleasure, and we look forward to seeing everyone that's joined us very soon on another one of our webinars. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. Bye, guys.
You're welcome.
Bye-bye.
Bye.